On the 28th of February, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a surprise military assault on Iran. In the opening hours, Iran's supreme leader was killed. The world's most critical oil shipping lane closed, and nearly 5 million people were set in motion, fleeing, displaced, uncertain of where to go or what would come next. But this war didn't begin in 2026. It didn't begin with a nuclear deal, or a drone strike, or a hostage crisis. It began, in many ways, with a coup. In 1953, engineered in Washington. To understand how two countries end up at war, you first have to understand how they were once allies. After World War II, Iran was a constitutional monarchy, and an oil-rich one. For decades, Britain had been extracting that wealth through a company called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The profits flowed mostly to London. Iranians saw almost none of it. In 1951, a nationalist politician named Mohammad Mossadegh became prime minister. His demand was straightforward. Iran's oil belongs to Iranians. He nationalized the oil industry. The British were furious, and they convinced the United States to act. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup. Mossadegh was removed from power and placed under house arrest, where he would remain until his death. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was restored to absolute power. He ruled for 26 years, backed by American money, American weapons, and American silence about the activities of his secret police. For ordinary Iranians, this moment became what historians call the original wound, a theft of democracy, carried out in broad daylight with Washington's fingerprints on it. A wound that has never fully closed. And here is the detail that history rarely foregrounds. Just 4 years after that coup, the United States helped Iran build its very first nuclear reactor, part of President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. The same country that would one day go to war over Iran's nuclear capabilities helped create them. By the late 1970s, the Shah's regime had grown deeply repressive. Protests spread across Iran. The streets filled with people who had lost patience with a ruler they had never chosen. In January 1979, the Shah fled the country. Into the vacuum came Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, an Islamic scholar who had spent years in exile, first in Iraq, then in France. He returned to Iran to a roaring welcome of millions. The country declared itself an Islamic republic, and it cast the United States as what Khomeini called the Great Satan. Then came the moment that sealed their enmity for decades. In November 1979, Iranian students stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats hostage. They held them for 444 days. Washington cut all diplomatic relations with Iran. They have never been formally restored. In the decades since, the two countries have communicated through third-party embassies. Pakistan represents Iran in Washington. Switzerland represents the United States in Tehran. That rupture, now nearly 45 years old, is one of the longest diplomatic breaks between any two major nations in the modern world. It has outlasted the Cold War, the Soviet Union, and every American president since Jimmy Carter. In the decades that followed, the United States and Iran never fought each other directly, but they fought constantly through others. When Iraq invaded Iran in 1980, the United States quietly backed Saddam Hussein. It provided him with intelligence, equipment, and diplomatic cover, even as his forces used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers in the field. Iran, in turn, began building what would become its defining strategic tool, a network of armed proxy groups across the Middle East. It funded and armed Hezbollah in Lebanon, which killed 241 United States Marines in a 1983 Beirut bombing. It backed militias that fought American troops in Iraq throughout the 2000s, killing and wounding hundreds. Iran also built a ballistic missile program, a force multiplier that did not require air superiority and could reach targets across the region. Then, in 2002, Western intelligence revealed that Iran had been secretly developing a nuclear program for years. International sanctions followed. So did a covert campaign, cyberattacks that destroyed Iranian enrichment centrifuges, and the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists on the streets of Tehran. For a brief moment, diplomacy found a way through. In 2015, the Obama administration and 5 other world powers brokered the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. It traded strict limits on Iran's enrichment program for substantial relief from sanctions. International inspectors confirmed Iran was complying. Then, in 2018, President Trump withdrew from the agreement, calling it the worst deal in history. Sanctions were reimposed. Iran's currency collapsed, and Iran, step by step, restarted its enrichment program, pushing the levels higher than they had ever been before. What had been a managed and contained rivalry began quietly, its final slide toward open war. In January 2020, a United States drone strike near Baghdad International Airport killed General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's elite Quds force, and arguably the most powerful military figure in the Middle East outside of Iran's own supreme leader. Iran responded with ballistic missile attacks on American military bases in Iraq. More than 100 United States soldiers suffered traumatic brain injuries. But the deeper significance of Soleimani's death was the signal it sent. The threshold for direct American military action against Iranian officials had dropped. Iran's leaders now understood something they had perhaps suspected, but never confirmed. Their own lives were on the table. 6 years later, that understanding would prove prophetic. The final descent toward war began in earnest on October 7, 2023, when Hamas, an Iran-backed militant group, launched a devastating attack on Israel. What followed was a cascade. Iran-backed militia forces launched more than 200 attacks on United States military personnel across the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. Israel, in response, launched a systematic campaign that eliminated the top leadership of both Hamas and Hezbollah, the most powerful pieces of what Iran called its axis of resistance. One by one, Iran's forward shield was dismantled. In June 2025, Israel launched what became known as the 12-Day War against Iran. In a significant escalation, United States aircraft struck Iran's nuclear facilities directly, at Fordow, at Isfahan, and at Natanz. Iran's air defense network was crippled. Back inside Iran, the country was under enormous internal strain. A collapse in the currency had sent prices soaring. In January 2026, the largest protests since the 1979 revolution broke out in cities across the country. The government cracked down hard. Thousands were killed. And then, on the 28th of February, 2026, while United States and Iranian negotiators were still at a table in Oman discussing the nuclear file, the assault began. It was a surprise. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed in the opening hours of the campaign. Within days, Iran had closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil flows every day. The war that had been building piece by piece, provocation by provocation, across 7 decades, had finally arrived. Wars are rarely born in a single moment. The 2026 conflict between the United States and Iran grew from a 1953 coup that generations of Iranians still talk about at dinner tables, from a nuclear program that America helped build, from a revolution, a hostage crisis, a proxy war, a broken nuclear deal, and a decade of escalating strikes and counterstrikes that each side told itself was the last one necessary. The story of how America and Iran became enemies is not a simple one. It does not have a single villain or a single mistake. It is a story of oil and ideology, of betrayal and genuine grievance, of two countries that have spent more than 7 decades unable to find a way to exist in the same world without threatening each other. And as of today, that story is far from over. The ceasefire is fragile. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested. Peace talks continue in uncertain back channels, with no timeline and no guarantee. What comes next will shape not just 2 nations, but the entire Middle East, the global energy economy, and the question of how the world's most volatile region finally finds, or fails to find, a lasting peace. That answer is still being written.